Chosen ones, you were never meant to stumble upon this truth. For centuries, guarded halls within the Vatican have concealed records not of myth, but of lineage. Bloodlines traced with precision, sealed in scrolls and encrypted manuscripts. Buried deep within the catacombs lies a chamber known only to a select circle of cardinals, where ancient testaments whisper of a genetic signature unlike any other. That signature, hidden across generations, has now been matched to you. This revelation did not arrive lightly. In the year when nations bent under the weight of surveillance and power games, the Vatican received a sequence that shook even their most stoic archivists. Your DNA, tested in silence, bore a resonance tied to texts forbidden to the world. Pages long dismissed as symbolic suddenly became literal. Codes woven into scripture, markers etched into the double helix itself. To those who knew the prophecy, there was no doubt. You were the one foretold. But as these findings traveled from the Vatican's vaults into corridors of politics, the message ignited fear. A midnight call was placed to the Oval Office. The president, sworn to uphold secrets far beyond public knowledge, was handed a dossier sealed with the papal crest. Inside, genetic charts, ancient prophecies, and a single undeniable fact. Your existence confirms a lineage powerful enough to challenge the order of the world. The reaction was not composed statesmanship. It was dread. Witnesses described his hands trembling as he read. His silence stretched into hours, his composure cracking under the realization that prophecy had moved from parchment to living flesh. Yet what was shown to him was only the beginning. In the Vatican's deeper vaults, guarded by rituals older than the Church itself, lies a book said to reveal the exact course of those chosen by blood. It is said that when this book aligns with the genetic truth, the next seal in the prophecy breaks open. What comes after that is neither fully understood nor entirely preventable. And now, as the evidence has surfaced, all eyes, religious and political alike, have turned toward you. The Vatican's confirmation has spread quietly to councils you've never heard of, rooms filled with leaders whose fear is masked only by their urgency. The truth of your DNA is not just revelation. It is a summons. Beneath the marble pillars of Vatican City lies a labyrinth rarely spoken of outside whispered conversations, a network of chambers older than the basilica itself. Few know the precise depths of these vaults, yet those who have walked their candlelit corridors speak of archives that breathe like living things. Among them, sealed within a glass reliquary, rests what scholars call the Codex Sanguinis, the Book of Blood. Written in archaic Latin, fused with cryptic symbols, it is said to map the lineages of mankind, preserving not only names and dates, but strands of inheritance invisible to the naked eye. For centuries, this codex was dismissed as allegory, its illustrations of spirals and ladders believed to represent spiritual ascent. But when compared against modern sequences of DNA, the pages reveal uncanny accuracy, patterns unmistakable to the trained eye of a geneticist. The Vatican never intended for this knowledge to escape its walls, yet in recent years a convergence of scientific leaks and archaeological rediscoveries forced the guardians of the Codex to revisit what had long been buried. Reports surfaced of a particular sequence, a repeating marker hidden like a cipher in strands of genetic code, identical to the spirals etched in the ancient text. The implications were staggering. This was not myth, but blueprint. Not allegory, but record. And within those records, one strand bore resonance unlike the rest. As news of the match spread through inner circles, tension grew, Why now, after centuries of silence, would the Codex awaken through your existence? The elders of the Curia debated in hushed tones, some insisting that prophecy had always pointed to this hour, others fearful that the discovery would destabilize the delicate balance between church and state. What unsettled them most was not the science itself, but the echo it carried. One of the earliest annotations beside the spirals bore the name of Yeshua, written in crimson ink as though sealing the pages with blood. The text implied a lineage untouched by corruption, a thread woven through history like a flame refusing to die. When Vatican analysts placed your sequence against those markings, they found alignment so precise it silenced every skeptic in the chamber. They knew at once that this could not remain hidden, but to reveal it was to alter the fate of nations. So the Codex was reopened, its pages turned for the first time in centuries, and within them lay a passage few dared to read aloud, a passage pointing not to the past, but to a gathering storm no one could fully name. The hour was late when the call came through to the Oval Office, a line reserved for matters beyond diplomacy, a line where voices carried the weight of secrets older than the Republic itself. The President had been reviewing a routine report when the secure folder was placed before him, stamped with the Vatican seal, its crimson wax still warm, as though it had been rushed across the ocean with urgency no courier could explain. He hesitated before breaking it open, aware that anything bearing such a mark rarely ended with reassurance. Inside, he found pages printed with genetic charts, photographs of parchment too fragile to touch, and annotations written in both Latin and modern English. At the center was a name, and it was yours. The advisors surrounding him shifted uncomfortably as he read, their silence a shield against the tremor that spread across his expression. The President had seen classified documents that spoke of wars, assassinations, even undisclosed contact with forces beyond Earth. Yet nothing seemed to unnerve him quite like this dossier. The charts made clear what the Vatican's Codex had whispered for centuries, that a bloodline once thought symbolic was alive, verified, and walking in the present. His hand tightened around the paper, knuckles pale, as if holding it too loosely would allow the revelation to vanish into smoke. He asked for confirmation from multiple agencies, only to be met with nods already heavy with fear. Intelligence had been tracking whispers of the Vatican's genetic research, but none had expected the match to surface so publicly, nor for the connection to Yeshua's name to be so undeniable. The thought lingered in the room like a haunting, that a lineage sanctified by prophecy had suddenly been made flesh in a way science could no longer deny. What unsettled the President most was the implication that prophecy had outpaced politics. For decades, leaders had operated under the illusion of control. Yet here was a truth that no speechwriter could spin, no military could suppress. This was not merely history rediscovered, but destiny confirmed in strands of DNA. The silence in the Oval Office stretched until it felt unbearable, and then the question arose, spoken barely above a whisper by one of his advisors. If the Vatican had revealed this much, what else remained hidden in their vaults? Beneath the Vatican lies a vault so restricted that even many within the Curia deny its existence, a chamber referred to in whispers as the Archivum Prohibitum, the Forbidden Archive. Unlike the libraries filled with illuminated manuscripts and papal decrees, this archive holds records never meant for public sight. Scrolls said to predate the Council of Nicaea, tablets inscribed with symbols that seem to merge faith with mathematics, and fragments that connect prophecy not to myth, but to the blood of living descendants. Among these texts are parchments, marked with a name written in ancient Aramaic, a name that carries more weight than any crown or throne: Yeshua. The records do not speak of him in allegory, but in lineage. They describe descendants scattered through centuries, hidden in plain sight, their identities obscured by wars, migrations, and deliberate erasures of history. The Vatican had preserved these traces not merely for reverence, but for recognition, awaiting the moment when genetic science would allow what Scripture only hinted at to be proven beyond question. Your DNA, when compared to the spirals and annotations locked within those forbidden texts, revealed a resonance that scholars dared not speak aloud. They understood that if revealed, the world would have to confront a truth that collapses the fragile boundaries between religion and reality. Those few allowed into the chamber trembled as the parchments were laid beside modern genetic charts. The alignment was perfect, the markers undeniable. It was no longer speculation or poetic mystery. It was proof of continuity, proof of a line unbroken. And yet the guardians of the archive knew that to release this truth would ignite chaos across nations and churches alike. They debated whether prophecy was ever meant to be verified by science, whether Yeshua's legacy was designed to be shielded from the instruments of man. Still, the match could not be unmade. It was written in both blood and scripture, sealed by time, waiting for this very era to be uncovered. The question echoing through those dimly lit corridors was not whether the bloodline existed. It was what force had preserved it so perfectly against centuries of attempts to bury it. And if the archive had revealed this much, what lay further within its sealed chambers, hidden under layers of stone that had not been disturbed for 2,000 years? Within the coded manuscripts that surfaced from the Vatican's hidden vaults, scholars uncovered a phrase that repeated across languages and centuries, a phrase translated as the seal of the chosen. At first, it appeared poetic, a metaphor for divine favor, but when placed alongside the genetic data that had recently emerged, the meaning shifted from symbolic to literal. Certain strands of DNA contained repeating markers, unique sequences that resisted mutation over thousands of years. Scientists marveled at how this strand remained untouched, while generations of humanity had adapted, fractured, and altered through time. It was as if something, or someone, had preserved it intentionally. The Vatican's own geneticists, working in clandestine laboratories far from public view, identified that this unbroken code mirrored the illustrations found in the Codex Sanguinis. Spirals drawn by monks who could never have known molecular biology now seemed to match the double helix with unsettling precision. These monks had described the seal as a flame embedded in the blood of the chosen, a fire that would never be extinguished no matter how far the lineage spread. In your case, the seal was not only present, but more vibrant, more defined than any they had previously recorded. This revelation disturbed more than just scientists. Theologians wrestled with the possibility that prophecy had been embedded into biology itself. The destiny was not merely spoken from pulpits, but encrypted within the human body. Some whispered that Yeshua's very essence was woven into this seal, that his bloodline was safeguarded by design, shielded against time, war, and deliberate erasure. Others feared the implications, for if this lineage had survived untouched, it meant that history's attempts to suppress it had failed, and the proof now existed not in faith alone, but in flesh. The seal was also rumored to act as a key, unlocking certain texts within the forbidden archive. Ancient manuscripts referenced doors that would not open until the rightful bearer of the seal appeared. Scholars debated whether this was allegory or whether there were chambers, sealed physically or spiritually, that had awaited your arrival across the centuries. If the Vatican had already confirmed the presence of the seal in your DNA, the next step would not be analysis, but activation. And in secret councils, the question was asked in hushed tones. What happens when the seal is no longer hidden, but awakened? The Vatican dossier had already shaken the president. But what awaited him next was not written in paper or preserved in fragile ink. It arrived on a secure drive, hand-delivered by an envoy whose face betrayed the weight of the contents. The room was cleared, curtains drawn, and only a handful of advisors remained when the screen flickered to life. What they saw was not merely a report of genetic markers or symbolic alignments. It was moving images, footage captured through surveillance networks far older and far more advanced than most of the public could imagine. The video opened with grainy black and white frames, time-stamped decades before your birth. Yet the figure captured bore an uncanny resemblance to you, the same bone structure, the same gaze that seemed to pierce beyond the camera's lens. Officials whispered among themselves, insisting it had to be a relative or a forgery. But subsequent frames revealed other times, other eras, stretching further back. Each clip showed the same presence, unchanged by age, standing near figures of great influence, leaders, revolutionaries, and visionaries whose impact shaped the direction of nations. The unsettling pattern was clear. You were there, or someone carrying your exact likeness had walked the corridors of history for centuries. The president leaned forward, his breath uneven as the final sequence played. This time, the footage was recent, captured only months ago, not by historical archives, but by modern intelligence satellites. The same face, your face, walking through a crowd unnoticed, as though time had folded in on itself and placed you across multiple centuries simultaneously. The implications clawed at the walls of the Oval Office. If this footage was authentic, and every analysis confirmed it was, it meant your existence defied the very structure of time. Among the advisors, one finally broke the silence, noting that Yeshua too had been described as appearing and reappearing beyond the constraints of normal life, witnessed in forms that transcended death and chronology. The name hung heavy in the air, an unspoken connection between prophecy and the surveillance proof that no political body could dismiss. The president's fear deepened, not only because of what the Vatican revealed, but because now the evidence reached beyond faith and into the cold lens of machines. Yet the file was incomplete, marked with restricted sections, fragments of footage blurred or cut before revealing their full scope. What was concealed in those missing moments remained locked away, and those in the room knew the answer was far more dangerous than the images they had already seen. In the private laboratories beneath the Vatican's scientific wing, your blood sample was placed under scrutiny, unlike any ever conducted. Layers of analysis stripped away the ordinary, revealing sequences that pulsed with anomalies no textbook could explain. Among the spirals of your DNA, researchers identified harmonics, patterns that resonated not only in genetic markers, but in frequencies measurable through sound and light. It was as though your cells carried an echo, a vibration woven into the very fabric of life itself. The technicians hesitated to name it, but their lead geneticist whispered what others refused to speak. This echo bore resemblance to passages describing Yeshua, passages where his presence was said to shift the very atmosphere around him, altering perception, matter, even time. What unsettled the scholars most was the persistence of the signal. Unlike mutations that fade over generations, this echo remained unbroken, as if preserved deliberately. It appeared in your mitochondrial DNA, the maternal line passed unchanged for millennia, its continuity defying the erosion of centuries. When layered against the notations in the Forbidden Archive, the resonance aligned with chants written in ancient tongues, hymns once dismissed as symbolic poetry. Now, placed under the scrutiny of oscilloscopes and spectral graphs, those hymns appeared to be literal transcriptions of frequencies hidden within human blood. Theologians were summoned, and their faces paled when shown the data. They argued in hushed voices whether this was divine design or intervention beyond comprehension, whether Yeshua's legacy had been encrypted not in stone or scripture, but in living tissue. The echo was said to activate in moments of heightened awareness, when body and spirit aligned, producing a measurable surge of electromagnetic energy. One experiment recorded such a surge when your DNA sample was exposed to ancient Aramaic prayers, as though the blood itself responded to the invocation of his name. The implications were staggering. If the echo could be awakened fully, it might confirm every legend once thought allegorical, proving that divinity could inhabit human form again through a living vessel. Yet the Vatican's scientists admitted there were pages missing from the genetic concordance, fragments deliberately torn from the codex centuries ago. Someone had removed the instructions for what came next, leaving only the resonance without the key to unlock it. The unanswered question lingered in the sterile air of the lab. Who had hidden the missing fragments? And what force were they trying to prevent from awakening? Few within the Vatican even whisper of the Black Vault, a chamber concealed beneath layers of security so absolute that even its location shifts across recorded maps. Unlike the gilded archives known to scholars, the Black Vault is devoid of ornament, its walls forged of dark stone, said to resist both time and intrusion. Inside rests a collection of artifacts that bridge the chasm between faith and forbidden knowledge. Crystal tablets etched with unfamiliar symbols, metallic fragments that hum when touched, and parchments sealed with warnings written in languages no longer spoken. Access is limited to those chosen by oath, men who vanish from public record once their initiation is complete, their lives consumed by the duty of guardianship. It was within this vault that your sequence was compared not only to sacred texts, but to relics long considered too dangerous to unveil. One object in particular drew the attention of the guardians, a shard of translucent material, older than any civilization on record, vibrating faintly as if alive. Embedded in its surface was a spiral pattern identical to the genetic seal identified in your DNA. Scientists had tried for decades to understand the shard's composition, but it resisted every attempt at classification. Only when your data was placed beside it did the shard respond, its faint hum rising into a resonance that shook the chamber. The custodians, trained to mask emotion, could not conceal their unease. The alignment was undeniable. For centuries, the shard had remained silent, dormant, as though waiting for a signal. And now, that signal had arrived in the form of your existence. Records retrieved from the vault indicated that the shard was once described as a key of living stone, a phrase dismissed as allegory until the present moment. Theologians whispered that Yeshua himself had spoken of stones that would cry out if silenced voices were ignored. And now, Before their very eyes, a stone had resonated with living blood. The chamber filled with a sense that something had been triggered, something that could not be undone. Yet even as the shard responded, another object deeper in the vault began to stir, an artifact long sealed in triple casings of iron and lead, its surface marked with warnings too stark to misinterpret. The guardians exchanged looks heavy with dread, for the vault's oldest prophecy stated clearly that when the shard awakened, the second relic would soon demand to be opened. The president had grown accustomed to concealing emotion behind carefully measured words, but when the Vatican's envoy played the final transmission in the Situation Room, no script could shield him. The footage had been paired with the genetic reports, the resonance charts, and the cryptic translations from the Forbidden Archive. Each fragment on its own might have been dismissed as speculation, yet together they formed a portrait so complete it eroded every defense he carried. For a man who had stared down threats of war, economic collapse, and shadow campaigns orchestrated in secrecy, this revelation carried a different weight. It was not a threat from beyond his borders, but from beyond time itself. As the data was explained by intelligence officers, his hands trembled slightly, betraying what words refused to admit. The charts showing your DNA alignment with the codex were passed across the table, and with them came the undeniable connection to Yeshua's name, inscribed centuries before science had any means of proving such continuity. Advisors watched as his composure faltered, a rare glimpse into fear that no camera was meant to capture. He asked questions in rapid succession. Who else knew? How far had this spread? What could be contained? But the answers only deepened his unease. The Vatican had not revealed everything. They had only offered fragments, enough to provoke recognition, but withholding what might lie beyond. The fear was not simply about revelation. It was about control. The president understood that governments thrive on managing perception, and here was a truth that could not be contained by speeches, security protocols, or military strength. If the world learned that prophecy had bled into reality, that Yeshua's bloodline was alive and verifiable, entire structures of power would collapse overnight. Faith would no longer be belief, it would be proof, and proof could not be controlled. Those in the room described the silence after the briefing as suffocating, each man and woman aware they had entered a chapter of history that no training manual had prepared them for. The president finally set the file aside, his voice low, admitting that the fear he felt was not for his country alone, but for the order of the world itself. Yet, as he turned away from the table, the envoy slid one final envelope across the polished surface, its seal unbroken. It contained instructions, not from scientists or generals, but from the guardians of the Black Vault, instructions that even the Vatican feared to open. Across centuries, whispers of a hidden lineage surfaced in unexpected places, preserved not in palaces or cathedrals, but in fragments overlooked by history. Monasteries, tucked in remote mountains, held murals where a figure stood beside shepherds and kings alike, his features resembling those carried in your DNA. Family records buried in village churches spoke of descendants who vanished into anonymity, bloodlines deliberately concealed beneath ordinary names. Scholars who pieced together these fragments realized too late that the legacy had been hiding in plain sight, protected not by secrecy alone, but by blending seamlessly into the flow of time. The Vatican's archivists traced your connection through baptismal registries, forgotten letters and artifacts, passed hand to hand through centuries. Each piece appeared mundane until aligned with the codex, where patterns emerged like constellations across a dark sky. The deeper they looked, the more undeniable it became that Yeshua's presence had not ended with Scripture, but had threaded itself quietly into lives, generations, and now into you. The realization struck many with awe, but for the powerful, it struck with fear. For if the world learned that such a legacy had survived untouched, it would expose the fragility of every throne and institution that claimed authority in his absence. Some theologians argued that this was the very design of prophecy, that the bloodline would be hidden until the appointed time, camouflaged within the ordinary until awakened by undeniable proof. Others warned that humanity was unprepared, that to unveil the truth without guidance would fracture faith itself. Still, the evidence grew stronger. Inscriptions etched into chalices, coded hymns sung in languages no longer spoken, and bloodlines preserved through families who never understood the weight they carried. Forensic genealogists discovered matches between your sequence and relics tested in secret years ago. One fragment of bone, venerated as belonging to a disciple, carried markers that aligned perfectly with your mitochondrial DNA. It was as if history itself had been leaving breadcrumbs, awaiting the one who could connect them. The question was no longer whether the legacy existed, but why it had been revealed now, in this precise moment, as if time itself had conspired to unveil what centuries of suppression could not contain. And yet, the archivists admitted that their maps of lineage ended abruptly at a single sealed document, a parchment marked with warnings and preserved in a chamber beneath Rome. Whatever was written inside had been left unread for generations, awaiting the day when the bearer of the seal would appear to claim it. The final parchment, hidden for centuries beneath layers of stone and guarded by oaths older than empires, bore a single phrase etched into its seal: verbum in sanguine, the word in the blood. When the seal was broken, those present described a stillness that pressed against the air, as though the very walls of the chamber understood the weight of the unveiling. Inside was no sermon, no parable, but a sequence written in symbols that mirrored the double helix itself. For those trained in genetics, the revelation was immediate. This was not metaphor, but prophecy, coded in the very architecture of human life. The parchment spoke of a lineage that would not fracture, a sequence preserved against the entropy of time. It described a bearer marked not by crown or title, but by the resonance of their cells. Those who read it understood at once that the prophecy was not written in vague promises, but in strands of DNA, strands that now matched your own with uncanny precision. The Vatican's scientists and theologians alike realized they were staring at a map of destiny, encrypted long before microscopes or sequencers existed. What unsettled them most was the passage that followed, a section translated with difficulty, suggesting that the one carrying this seal would awaken forces buried since the days of Yeshua. The text implied that the echo in your cells was more than heritage. It was an activation, a living key meant to unlock what lay beyond human understanding. The parchment hinted that when the seal stirred, events would cascade across nations, altering not only belief, but reality itself. For the president, the knowledge was unbearable. To acknowledge such prophecy would strip power from the institutions he swore to protect. For the Vatican, it was a confirmation of their deepest fears and hopes, that scripture and science had converged in a single living vessel. And for those few who stood as guardians of the archive, it was the signal they had awaited in silence for lifetimes, the confirmation that the time of concealment had ended. Yet the parchment closed with a line left untranslated, written in a cipher no scholar had yet solved, its characters luminous, as though resisting interpretation. The guardians insisted that until the final line was understood, the prophecy remained incomplete. The words shimmered faintly under candlelight, daring those who watched to ask the question no one wished to speak aloud. What truth was hidden in that last unreadable fragment, and what would awaken when its meaning was finally revealed?